Ladies and gentlemen, previously we have already taken a look at looking for help, in terms of computing or coding. If you're stuck with what you're doing, how do you actually go and search and get good information back? But let's just say that wasn't enough. Let's just say you had to ask someone. You'll find that, depending on how you ask your questions, well, maybe you wouldn't really get a response. And in the worst case, you may even get a little bit of aggression. At best, sometimes you just get ignored. And in the worst case, sometimes people just tell you, we're not going to do your homework. So how do we avoid this? What is the problem here? How can we ask good questions and get good answers? Today, let's talk about that on this Random Wednesday episode. Hello and welcome back to another Random Wednesday episode. So we're gonna just jump into it here. Our goal for today is to basically find out how to ask questions to elicit a positive response so that people want to help you. Really, the long and short of this can be summarized into two things. Firstly, make it easy for them to help you. And second, show that you're genuine, show that you've already put in the work. These two things in conjunction will make someone willing to help you. With this in mind, here's how we're going to approach today's episode. Essentially, we're going to do it in a don't do X, do Y kind of format. And yeah, I'll try and show you some examples, anonymous of course, of how, you could potentially turn people off, right? You make them not want to answer. So yeah, let's take a look at our first tip. Number 1, the quantity of information should be well balanced. You don't want to give too much, you don't want to give too little. So here are two common mistakes I see a lot. Firstly, dumping your entire code there. Now, I'm not saying this is a bad thing. Sometimes people do need to refer to your entire code. But if that is the first thing they see, chances are they're not going to go further. It is never fun to crawl through an entire large piece of code because something is wrong, and especially if you don't make that something clear. The other extreme to this would be to give no information at all. If you just go like, I did X and it didn't work, that's not going to be enough information. How did you do X? Were you even really doing that, or were you doing something else? And what did you mean by it didn't work? Right? There are a lot of variables here, and that makes helping you difficult. In fact, the whole I did X was particularly frustrating. You are describing your expectations, but in the first place, your expectations have already disconnected from reality, so it doesn't help us. I don't know what you've actually done and why that, is actually disconnected from what you're expecting. So if something doesn't work and you want to ask about it online, here are some things you can do to make it much easier for someone to answer. Firstly, if there is an error message, show it prominently, because usually that is the biggest clue. Second, you should always make clear what your expectations are and how the results actually sort of deviate from your expectations. The reason for this is because it's not always clear what you want, and if that is not clear, we couldn't begin to fix your problem. We couldn't begin to tell you what direction to look in to go closer to what you want. Third, and this concerns the amount of code you have to show. Essentially, try your best to narrow it down to, the most relevant lines of code or the most relevant blocks of code and show those. The idea is try not to make it mandatory to read all your code in order to figure out the problem. Most experienced coders are able to sort of stare at short snippets of code and very quickly tell you what the problem is. But if they have to go through hundreds of lines, then they're going to find something better to do. At the same time, of course, try and make the rest of your code available, but you could always put it on another place. For example, you could just, put all your code on Pastebin and link to it, right? So if they needed to, take a look at your code for whatever reason, there is a place for them to find it. So yeah, the whole point of doing this is to make it easy to help you. The less efforts, someone has to go through to give you some amount of assistance, the more assistance you're gonna get. So that is tip number 1. So let's move on now to tip number 2. Display effort. Now, anytime you see a Stack Overflow question or a question on Reddit that looks like it came right out of a textbook and the person did not actually specify anything else, these are the times in which you see a lot of people saying, we're not going to do your homework for you, And there is a good reason for this. After all, homework is there for you to sharpen your mind, right? If you get people to do it online, number one, it's plagiarism. Number two, it does you no good. So people aren't going to do that. If you are really stuck on a homework question, here's what you can do to make things better. Firstly, make it very clear that you've done something, right? Tell them that you've done X and X doesn't work. Again, show them your expectations, why your expectations are being violated. Not only does doing that make it easier to help you, it also shows that you have put in the effort. You have tried, but you have a gap in your understanding that prevents you from being able to progress further. When people see that, they're more likely to help. Even if you really are completely stumped, there are still ways to phrase your question such that, well, people can help you. For example, if there's a question you don't know, you can still try and say, very high level things. For example, I know I need to use a loop to do this calculation, but I have no idea what variables go in there. That's good, right? That shows that you have at least attempted to think about the question. But if you have really zero idea, what you could do is you could try and make it clear that you're not asking for the answer. Perhaps say, how do I approach this question? How do I get started? What tools do I need? Basically, you're asking for a hint. You're asking for a nudge in the right direction. You're not asking for the solution. When you phrase things that way, people tend to be more helpful as well. So yeah, this tip involves proving that you're genuine, showing that you want to learn, that you're not here for a quick answer. And when people get this vibe, they're more likely to help. So yeah, now let's move on to tip number 3. And that is, don't ask overly open-ended questions. I think I see this a lot, especially for those who are, self-studying or, they want to, think about, say, uni, but don't have a very concrete idea of what to ask. We end up with extremely broad questions like, where can I learn to program? Or even worse, how do I program? And yeah, when you ask a question like that, you're creating way too many variables, and there are a lot of subjective elements to it. You have to narrow things down. What language do you want to learn? What end goal do you have in mind? One possible way in which you could approach, the same question is to go like, okay, I'm interested in game development. I have no prior programming background. So what are good tools I could pick up to start off with? Something like that. And this at least cuts down on a lot of the variables. At least someone answering your question knows what end goal you have in mind. Basically, the whole point of doing this is to, cut down on the number of variables, the number of uncertainties in the answers. Basically, try and avoid asking any question in which the answer would be, it depends. I've seen a lot of questions like this, right? For example, things like, do I need physics to do computer science, right? The thing is, this is never a clear yes or no. It depends. It depends on what you're doing. It depends on what you want. Yeah, it depends on many factors. So yeah, the more of this you can cut down, the better, because then you will get actual answers as opposed to it depends. It also makes it easier, again, for someone to, respond to you because, they could give you something more concrete. Now, as of the time of editing, I've actually, come across a few more things that I wanted to bring up just very quickly. So briefly, here are 3 other things you want to try and avoid. Firstly, asking for something that is very fundamentally factual. If you're asking a broad knowledge question that can be answered by, say, a textbook or by a website, then you're better off doing an online search. Instead of asking this as a question, just look it up. Study the subject first, and then if you have any further questions on top of that, you'll ask those questions instead. Remember, you're only looking for help to fill in the gaps in your understanding. Here are 2 more that could create a very bad impression. Firstly, don't ask for anyone to infringe on copyright. In my case, what this usually involves are people coming up to me and asking if I could send my school notes for a particular module, or even worse, everything. I'm not going to do that because that is going to be a violation of my professor's copyright. I get that in certain areas resources can be scarce, but asking me to send out someone's work isn't the right way to approach this. Chances are you're going to be able to find generic resources online. Try those. If you have any doubts arising from that, then ask questions about that stuff. And finally, some things there is a clear authority for. So you want to ask the authority, not, just the general people online. One big example of this is if you're asking about a particular school or college. Unless you're going to ask me about my personal experience at that place, chances are I'm not the right person to ask. If you're asking about things like fees or the exact contents of courses, you'd want to check with the university. Even if it was something I had personally experienced, my experience isn't necessarily going to be the same. Modules change over time, fees change over time. And in such cases, since there already is a clear authority that can answer your question, go straight to them. They are going to give you far better information than I ever can. So yeah, that's basically sort of the key tips behind this. Well, there are a few other things that really make people angry. For example, asking for help ASAP. Please don't do that. If you want people to help you really quick and you come across kind of aggressive in that, good luck getting responses. So again, all of this boils down to the same two things, which is firstly, make it easy for them to answer you, and secondly, come across as genuine. Prove that you've already done your work and that you're just stuck on something and you need help proceeding with that. The unfortunate truth about the internet is that there are always people who are going to say things you don't like to hear. But, by just sort of making sure that you approach things the right way, you could elicit a lot of good answers. Many of the negative examples I've shown you throughout this video have been slightly tweaked, but they were based on, actual real questions from sites like Reddit and Stack Overflow. But you can see how you phrase your question, what you put in there, what you omit from there, will change the kind of responses you get. So it's very important to express yourself well. Anyway, that's about it for this episode. Don't be discouraged if you ask a question and nobody answers, right? That's just how things are. Try again, look elsewhere, or shoot me a message and I'll see what I can do for you. That's all there is again. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, you're watching 0612 TV with NERDfirst.net. Thank you very much for watching. If you like my work and are feeling generous, you can shoot me a one-time donation on PayPal or sign up for a recurring one on Patreon. Of course, you can simply like, comment, and subscribe. You know the deal. For more videos, links to my channel and a related playlist are on screen. Thank you for your support.